Look like the cream of wheat man finna be cooked one more again. Coming to paperback and e-readers, John Haynes, Illuminati. The man who rules the world takes on the head of the global elite in this action-packed, all-new John Haynes series adventure. Pre-order your copy of John Haynes, Illuminati on Amazon.com and online booksellers everywhere. Better get the coleslaw, y'all, cause we're having us a barbecue. New York Mayor Eric Adams is suing Texas bus companies for $700 million to get compensation for feeding, clothing, and caring for migrants that are shipped up to New York City. Good luck getting that with all the federal interstate commerce laws.
All new for you at 5 o'clock. The mayor of New York City, we found out today, is suing some Texas bus companies for their involvement in transporting migrants, and he wants them to pay the cost of housing those migrants. The lawsuit, in fact, names 17 companies and is looking for at least $708 million. The suit says more than 33,000 migrants have arrived in New York since the spring of 2022, and that the bus companies have violated New York's social services law by not paying for the cost of continued care. And since those buses and migrants were, of course, sent by Texas Governor Greg Abbott and the state, the Texas governor released a statement today. Here's what it says in part, quote, "Every migrant bused or flown to New York City did so voluntarily after having been authorized by the Biden administration to remain in the United States. As such, they have constitutional authority to travel across the country that Mayor Adams is interfering with."
Now, according to reports, New York Mayor Eric Adams is suing 17 bus companies for over $700 million to get compensation for feeding, clothing, caring, and transporting migrants up to New York City. Now, the mayor says that the state of Texas and these bus companies have violated New York City's social services law by transporting these migrants up to New York City. However, that whole claim really isn't going to stand up in any court. And it's not going to stand up in any court because federal law supersedes state law as related to interstate commerce. And according to our Constitution, no local law can intercede as related to trying to stop federal interstate commerce. Now, according to Greg Abbott, as related to federal law, he says that since these migrants have basically been processed through the federal immigration system, which is ICE, these individuals were vetted and put on these buses to be transported wherever they wanted to go. And that all falls in line as related to our U.S. Constitution and also falls in line with the federal interstate commerce laws, which make it where an individual can travel from one part of the country to the next. Now, the big problem here isn't the transportation of these migrants. No, the real problem here is New York Mayor Eric Adams and how desperate he is to try to find a way to stem the tide of migrants coming all the way up from Texas to New York City. And because Eric Adams knows that he doesn't really have many cards to play as related to the law. What he's doing is making this desperate Hail Mary to try to stop migrants from coming to New York, now that he's run out of all sorts of options as related to getting funding from the Biden administration and even discouraging the migrants from coming up to New York City. What he's hoping to do by going out and filing this lawsuit is try to get some sort of attention from Greg Abbott, or try to get some people at these bus companies to be discouraged. However, his latest attempts to try to discourage bus companies by trying to create his own first unilateral executive order to demand that there would be 32 hours of notice for buses to come into the city with migrants was basically ignored by some bus companies, and others began transporting migrants into the state of New Jersey to circumvent this executive order. And basically the migrants continue to come up to New York City, and there's no way of stopping these migrants from coming to New York City as related to trying to file lawsuits. And this just shows how desperate the Adams administration is as related to this entire campaign, because they're running out of options. And as they run out of options, what they're hoping is that some Hail Mary will be able to stand up in court. However, this lawsuit has no ability to stand up whatsoever if you understand basic civics, because anyone who understands basic civics understands that federal laws supersede state laws. And when it comes to this Social Services Act, this argument falls completely apart, because the city already has a right to shelter law, not to mention the sanctuary city law that it had established. And it's the city's own policies that are the problem in this situation regarding these migrants. Now, these policies were primarily made in an effort to try to spite the Trump administration, and this whole series of legislation basically shows why you don't legislate based on feelings, because when you legislate based on feelings, there are consequences for your actions. And when you create a cause based on social justice, the effect is that the city winds up becoming fiscally overwhelmed by this virtue signaling. And that's what happened to Eric Adams. He became fiscally overwhelmed as he was looking to create a covert contract with the Biden administration. As he virtue signaled, he thought that the Biden administration would go out and fund the feeding, clothing, and housing of these migrants under the city and state sanctuary city laws. However, the Biden administration had no real effort or jurisdiction to fund those individuals, because they are not in charge of funding those individuals as related to the state laws. No, the whole situation with migrants basically was under the jurisdiction of ICE. However, the city and the state of New York, again, in their feelings about Donald Trump, decided they were going to virtue signal and take over the care of these migrants, saying that Donald Trump was a racist and ICE was a racist. However, I have to wonder, is Eric Adams being racist by looking to create policies to discourage migrants? And is he being racist by filing a lawsuit against the state of Texas for going and transporting migrants across interstate commerce lines? I mean, critical questions I have to ask about this whole situation regarding Eric Adams' desperate ploys to try to find a legal way to deal with these migrants. However, the only legal way to deal with this entire migrant crisis is to repeal the sanctuary city laws. However, repealing the sanctuary city laws, one, makes the Blue Party appear to be racist, and two, also makes them look like hypocrites. Unfortunately, that is the only optical way to alleviate the migrant crisis in the short term, because the Biden administration is not going to be capable of being able to solve this migrant crisis with a red Congress in effect, because with a red Congress in effect, there will be no allocation of money for individuals who entered the country illegally to feed, clothe, and house them. And that is a strategic mistake that the Blue Party made as related to this migrant crisis, because they thought that, that they could transport these individuals, virtue signal, and think that they could care for all of these individuals, and they thought they could care for all of these individuals and be able to maintain their entire fiscal stability. Now, this was completely a foolish frame of thinking from Eric Adams, and I would dare say Kathy Hochul and Joe Biden, as related to New York City, because New York City basically was in the middle of a fiscal deficit before Eric Adams took office, and that fiscal deficit should have been the thing Eric Adams should have critically thought about before he went out here and smiled and said he was going to maintain the sanctuary city policies established by Andrew Cuomo and Bill de Blasio on December 31st, 2021. He should have thought critically about that as he was dealing with a fiscal budget deficit. Unfortunately, he thought he could coast on the COVID money, and he thought he could go out and virtue signal, creating a covert contract with the Biden administration as related to the migrants being transported in the middle of 2022, and he thought he could be able to handle the situation even though there were already 100,000 homeless New Yorkers, many who were veterans who served this country, and he thought he could be able to maintain the city's fiscal situation, not understanding adding on another 33,000 migrants and then another 100,000 after that was going to create a further fiscal crisis, and again, a fiscal crisis unilaterally created by Eric Adams, because he wasn't looking to lead New York City or maintain New York City's economy. No, it was all about him looking to try to bootlick and get brownie points with Joe Biden, because the Biden of Brooklyn wanted to bootlick and pander, hoping that this whole situation of caring for the migrants would hopefully lead to him being able to get promoted to a job in the Biden second cabinet of 2024. Unfortunately, he doesn't understand that Joe Biden really didn't care about him because he blew him off way back in 2022. But that didn't stop the cream of wheat man from trying to be Joe Biden's George Jefferson and chasing down Joe Biden. But Joe Biden has not really been concerned, even though Eric Adams has made flights to Washington to try to get funding, not understanding that funding is something that is usually done through lobbyists in Congress, and with the Blue Party, lobbyists not really interested in trying to get funding for migrants here. They're more interested in Ukraine and Israel. They're not interested in giving New York money to care for individuals who entered the country illegally, because that would negatively affect the poll numbers of all of those politicians. It would basically make it where those individuals, when they tried to run in 2024 as related to this year for their congressional seats, lead to these individuals getting voted out of office. So nobody's looking to go out here and try to save Eric Adams as related to his whole fiscal situation. No, what was happening here is a game of political chess, and sadly Eric Adams continues to play Candyland, thinking holding up a green card instead of a pink card will get him some results, and thinking that this frivolous lawsuit will get him some sort of compensation. But there is no compensation for this frivolous lawsuit, because when it comes to the United States Constitution, it basically supersedes the social service law of New York, and it basically supersedes the sanctuary city laws, And that's why we should have gone out here and looked to repeal the, as I believe, unconstitutional sanctuary city law, because the sanctuary city law, as I see it, is unconstitutional, because you're looking to provide sanctuary for individuals who entered the country illegally from a state perspective and looking to try to do the job of the federal government. And this whole lawsuit basically shows how Eric Adams is contradictory, because he sits there and says in some reports that this is a federal matter. Well, if it's a federal matter, why are you suing bus companies as related to the interstate commerce? I mean, that's another critical question I have to ask Eric Adams, because with this lawsuit basically and the executive order he made, he's making himself appear to be more incompetent, and making himself appear to be more incompetent because it's clear that he doesn't know the law. And you would think, again, former police officer would have a better understanding of the law, to understand the workings of the law. But this guy basically is just so at his wits' end and so caught up in his emotions about being cooked by Greg Abbott, that the cream of wheat man really doesn't see how he's making himself appear to be more incompetent with these desperate ploys, because a competent individual would have said, hey, Albany, we need to repeal the sanctuary city law. Hey, city council, we need to repeal the sanctuary city law. Moreover, they would go out here and say that when it comes to the right to shelter law, the right to shelter law is one that is only able to be provided for New Yorkers who are U.S. citizens. That is what a smart politician would do. Unfortunately, the Biden of Brooklyn is too caught up in bootlicking Joe Biden and caught up a tree as related to his career, that with a 28% approval rating, he knows that he's basically cooked at this point. And with the cream of wheat man basically being cooked at this point as related to his career, he's desperate to do anything to stop the flow of migrants. However, the solution is right in front of him, and sadly he can't see it, nor can the city council or the state legislators see it. And the only actions they can take would basically lead to them all getting voted out of office, because the only actions you can take at this point is to concede defeat, admit that the sanctuary city law is a certified failure on the level of the jab mandates and prohibition, and admit that this whole policy is the next biggest failure next to bail reform. Have to admit all of these things, because this policy has to be repealed, because you cannot provide sanctuary for individuals who enter the country illegally and be able to operate a government and make it fiscally sound. No, those duties are in the hands of Immigration Customs Enforcement, or ICE, for a reason, and there is money allocated to the federal government to deal with these individuals, and they have that jurisdiction for a reason. And many in the Blue Party are finding out that that reason isn't racist. No, this is done to set a boundary as related to vetting individuals, and made as a standard because only the federal government can vet individuals to see who is fit for being in the country and be able to provide proper hearings. And while that bureaucratic process is long, it's one that is effective in vetting individuals and not just allowing 13 million people to come into the country without any sort of vetting. So this is where Eric Adams and many in the Blue Party are learning a hard lesson as related to politics and the subtle politics that transpire in this bureaucracy. they are learning a hard lesson, and this frivolous lawsuit is guaranteed to be tossed out because this frivolous lawsuit basically violates our interstate commerce laws and our Constitution, which guarantee an individual can travel across the country freely. And these efforts to try to restrict travel across the country freely basically show how all of these politicians who were so caught up in looking to virtue signal about how now racist they are ironically having the same position as the racist when they have to go out here and actually care for these individuals. So when I look at this whole policy and this lawsuit is just comical overall. It's hilarious to me because with this lawsuit, Eric Adams is basically turning into the cream of wheat man who's cooking his career, because when you make a lawsuit like this that shows how desperate you are, it basically shows that you are just not fit for office and not qualified to be the mayor of New York. Now, if you want to pick up some of my books that show you the subtle politics transpiring around everyone, you can find my novel, The Temptation of John Haynes, on Amazon.com. And with that book, you can learn more about what goes on between the lines of business and politics as related to the fantasy world that John Haynes is in. And you can also pick up the other books in the SJS Direct universe, like the ISIS series and the Esteem series and the John Haynes series, and the books of the Spinsterella trilogy, and my black sorority novel, The Thetas, my black vampire novel, Eternal Night. And if you want to pick up the first full John Haynes comic, you can get John Haynes at Death's Door on Lulu.com in paperback by clicking the link in the description box and get that comic for the same price as it was on the 2022 Kickstarter. And if you want to see me make more videos taking the cream of wheat man to the barbecue, you can send a donation to the Patreon, the PayPal, or the Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback and e-readers, The Temptation of John Haynes. Give in to temptation and pick up this action-packed African-American paranormal romance. Get The Temptation of John Haynes in paperback and e-readers today. Now available in paperback and Kindle Unlimited. John Haynes, the man with nothing to lose. The man who rules the world runs into the irresistible force of a man with nothing to lose in this action-packed, all-new John Haynes series adventure. Get the regular and variant editions of John Haynes, the man with nothing to lose on Amazon.com today. Now available in paperback and e-readers. ISIS, All About the Goddess. The Goddess Next Door bears all in the art studio to catch a campus stalker in this action-packed ISIS series mystery. Get your copy of ISIS, All About the Goddess in paperback and e-readers at online booksellers everywhere. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.